Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Are You Smarter Than a Libertarian? And today we bring back my guest, the Mass Truther. We're having some technical issues, so you only going to get to hear him. You won't get to see him. And today we're going to hit on two topics, maybe go into a third one about what's going on in Ukraine right now strategically. But that if we have time, so we're going to hit on the 50-year mortgages being proposed as well as the effects of adult entertainment on families and people as a whole. So, since the Mass Truth actually proposed this idea, I'm going to let him kick it off with why pornography may need to be banned. Take it away.
Well, thanks for having me again, Jeff. I appreciate it. If you want to look further into this, there's a lot of good resources that the pornography websites actually post themselves. So don't look up the actual websites, but if you look up their organizations, you can find a lot of the statistics about this. But why I think it needs to be banned comes down to several reasons. The first one is a lot of studies show that pornography interacts like cocaine in the brain. It's addictive. And it's not addictive in the sense like alcohol or marijuana, but it's addictive in the sense like cocaine. We all, or at least a lot of people, know someone that's had a cocaine addiction that's seen it destroy their lives. We don't walk around and see, dispensaries selling cocaine all over the place. Yet we do see pornography that's easily accessible to minors. You can just look it up and anyone can access it. Now, some states are making it where the big ones like Pornhub or other things are making it so you have to provide IDs to see it to prove that you're over 18, but that doesn't prevent the smaller ones from allowing people to see it still. On top of that, I think another big issue with it is that it's destroying relationships. It's causing a lot of men younger than 40. I think a third, 1 in 3 men that have ED that are under 40 are directly related to porn use. And that affects both the fertility rate and that affects the satisfaction within relationships.
I can see that, and my only argument to that is we have a plethora of information at our hands that we know these effects can have on people. I'm not disputing the negative things of it. However, I don't believe it's the role of the government to step in and do something. I believe it is on the individual to be responsible for their own life. Now, if let's say they're addicted to porn and it causes them to lose their job, maybe start committing crime, even though there's been no research to show that that's a conclusive outcome of it. We're not in a lack of information age anymore. Information is not gatekept for us. We can go online and find out exactly what it does to us. But we have to understand that ultimately, as adults, we have a responsibility to be responsible to ourselves. Now, as far as children, I agree there should be most likely an age restriction on it. Verify your ID that you're over 18. I don't argue that point. I agree with that point. It's like alcohol or smoking. It should be 18 and done because this kind of goes into what a video I did about age of consent laws. Is we don't have a uniform law across the entire country for one thing. We have Romeo and Juliet exemptions. We have you can be 17 and join the military with parental consent, or you can join at 18, but you can't drink until you're 21. And in Illinois, you can't smoke till you're 25, or you can't buy cigarettes till you're 21. So it's like if we're gonna, and we just need to figure out like have one standard across the board and stop creating caveats because all it does is create confusion in society.
Now, I want to touch on one of those points that you mentioned. You mentioned that it's not the government's job to step in. I would agree with that. However, the government did allow this to happen. So I think that, we do need to put forward, laws forward, like you mentioned, the restrictions on minors seeing that, but we also need to, enforce companies that are clearly involved within sex trafficking that relates to the pornography industry, or they're putting minors in their videos, or they're not mandating ethical work environment. So I
I,
think that yes, it is up to the individual, but it's up to the government, I think, to provide that information or to get that information out there.
okay, my question is, why is it the government's responsibility? We all have smartphones. We all have access to the internet. Public library, friend Wi-Fi, doesn't matter. Why is it the government's responsibility to inform us when we have access to more information at this point in history than any other point before it?
Well, I
Are
would
are
say
we
right.
saying that because what it's sounding like, at least to me through my lens of viewing it, is that people aren't smart enough to figure it out for themselves and they need someone to tell them. And I
I mean,
don't
that's
think,
correct, I would say.
but what does that say? If you're not smart enough to figure it out, then what are you not smart enough to figure out else in your life?
Probably a lot of things, I would say, but I think you're right that they're not smart enough to figure that out.
And that's my whole thing is like, okay, if we're saying that they're not smart enough, then where do we draw those lines? Are they
That's a
not
good.
smart enough to figure out who to vote for? And do we get in?
I would say that's the case too.
Okay, then how do we? What's the workaround?
Well, I think we get into, I don't necessarily think that there is a workaround. I think the only real one would just to be, elect people that, are willing to do the right thing regardless of, party affiliation. I think that's like the, basic what we can really ask for. Like we can have an ideal world where people are smart enough to make the correct decisions for themselves most of the time. Obviously, not everyone's going to make the right decision all the time. We're human, but I don't think that ideal world is, recognizable, at least in this, near future.
And honestly, I don't think because I saw this neat little thing last night on TikTok. They talked about the end of 1984, the book, and Big Brother was talking about power, and I believe it to be very true. People don't go into politics to do better. The ultimate goal of going into politics is power, because power is an end in and of itself. A revolution is not the end, it's the power that the revolution can give itself that is the end goal. So I don't look at politicians as being able to go in and create regulations for society, because my question always comes down to, if we elect people from the very same group of people that need laws and regulations made for them, what does that, then would they not create caveats for themselves like they do right now?
Well, I would say, let me, do you know who Thomas Massey is?
Yes.
I would say, as far as a politician goes, if we elected more people that were like him, that this country would be in a better place. And, I think it's unrealistic to assume it would be in a, radically different place or radically better, but it would be probably, somewhat noticeably better. And I don't think we would have gone to a shutdown. So I think it's realistic to elect better politicians.
But ultimately, for me, when I look at the politicians we have now, unless we want to go and bring up the apportionment amendment, which I would have no problems with, which would take Congress from 435 in the House to 6,000 plus representatives, because congressional districts would be capped at 50,000 people. That would be a way I could see a workaround, because then you could have desperate, disparate opinions on how to get laws done. And plus, you would also break the big money lobbyists, because you would need to influence about 3,500 people to get a bill passed, whereas right now you only have to do 218 to get a bill passed with a simple majority in the House.
I agree. I think that would be a good idea. I'm just more saying that I think Thomas Massey, to me, is proof that if you elect, officials that are going to do the right thing most of the time, that we will see that there is potential for politicians to be good.
I can see that from Massey. I can also kind of see that from Rand Paul. I like him. But for me, what I've kind of learned as a libertarian, at least in the current system we have, we're always on the outside looking in. We always are. Everyone who wants to do good in government usually finds a way to get taken out of government. They really do.
I'd agree with that, but I think the Rand Paul one, he's a good one too. Coincidence, he's from Kentucky as well. I don't know, but
Yeah, I like his
um,
father.
I just think it's proof that we can either complain about the current system, or we can try to work with it and try to get people like him in there. And I think it's more realistic to do something like that than to reform an entire system that's been around for hundreds of years. Like, I just don't think that's going to happen.
Well, I mean, it took 203 years for the Congressional Pay Amendment to be passed, and that was actually an amendment that was originally proposed with the Apportionment Amendment in the original Bill of Rights.
Sure, I guess I'm just speaking realistically here. Like, I just don't think that you said it goes from 235 to 6,000. That's just not. I don't see. If we're just judging based on who's in power, it wouldn't benefit them for that to happen. So I don't
That's why it'll
anticipate that
never
to happen.
happen. That's why we need to go the other way and make this almost a strictly volunteer society. Because I'm one of these people, I don't believe in obligations. I don't have any obligation or loyalty to this country unless I choose to. That's just me.
See, I can understand that perspective. I just think, if we're being, we have a system, and I think we can either work with it and try to, make it better,
Yeah.
or I don't think reforming it, completely or radically is that realistic. Unfortunately, like, I think these are good ideas in theory, but just in practice, I just don't think it would be, the bureaucracy of it would all just prevent it from happening.
Yeah, and I can agree with that, but for me, it's just like I look at it because I really kind of try to be objective as possible with it, which I look at the people that say we need more representation, but it's like you only want the representation that agrees with you. You don't really want more of it. You just want your flavor of it. And that's where I have the problem because Thomas Jefferson warned about the House of Representatives becoming an elite country club, and that's what it is. We have very low turnover. In off election years, the turnover is less than 5%.
I mean, I agree with that, that it's tough to get in, and they want to cling to those spots. That's why we see so many, Nancy Pelosi type people up in Washington, D.C. that are still hanging on to positions, even though I saw she did step down. But
Yeah.
regardless, I mean, it's, we have a system. I think we got to work with it, and putting people like Massey up there, or, Rand Paul, or the people that, bring in a different perspective. That's the best we can do, I think.
Oh, I think that is probably the best we can do in the practical sense. The more hypothetical, and that's kind of what I try to do here as well. Is just I want people to expand their mind a little bit and think like, oh, this actually might be better. But I understand practicalities. I'm more or less pragmatic myself. Where do we find people, and how do we find people like Rand Paul and Thomas Massey? Where do we find them? Because they
You
don't
know,
grow on trees.
I think that's a good question. I think a more important or a harder thing to do would be, how do we get them elected? Because, like you said, that turnover rate is so small, and money plays such a big, part of it.
I don't even think it's money, honestly, because when you look at during Obama's presidency, 8 of the top 10 campaign contributions contributed to both Obama and McCain, and then also Obama and Romney. The big money, they don't care who wins. They donate to both sides equally because they're going to win when it comes out. Whoever wins wins. So that's the problem we run into because it's also we teach kids that like I have many African American friends, and a lot of them were taught vote blue no matter who, even if the person is not the best candidate. So how do we break that? Because people become indoctrinated through their families more than anything else, and that's on both sides.
Yeah, I like to use the word I use is programmed. Um, I think that a lot of people. I think it comes from schools as well. Being in a university, in a public university, if you're going to be taking classes, you're going to be, you're not going to do well in those classes if they're liberal arts classes. If you're going to be providing a conservative perspective, everyone just knows that. And
Yeah,
then that's on top of like the schools, like the way what's in the textbooks, and then what questions are we allowed to ask, what questions are we not allowed to ask. And I think that's ridiculous that there's some we are and some we aren't.
I agree with that. I think every question should be able to be asked. Like, no question should be off limits because when you force questions that need to be asked into the dark, they tend to warp and twist, and then you really don't like the outcomes of them.
Yeah, I agree completely, and I think a good example of this would be, I just recently learned about this guy because I saw a New York Times article, but there's a guy named Nick Fuentes who apparently that's what happened with him. He was just asking questions, and then he got or people tried to cancel him, and now I guess. I'm not too tapped into the conservative movement necessarily, but I saw that there's almost like a divide in there, and that's really interesting to see that it's going in two different directions, and they both oppose each other almost more than they oppose leftists.
And yeah, I really been staying out of like the conservative side of TikTok. I got a question. Am I coming through staticky because I'm hearing you?
Just a little bit staticky, but it's not I'm not hearing it on every word.
Okay, because I'm thinking, okay, I'm hearing that static. So maybe try to mute your mic and see if that still happens when I'm talking. Okay, yeah, I'm not hearing it anymore on my end. So I guess it was just the feedback. Okay, but yeah, the Nick Fuentes thing, he is an interesting individual. And I saw that a lot of people saying that when they killed Charlie Kirk, they took the guy that wanted to have the conversation with you, and you brought the guy, also Milo Yiannopoulos, you also brought the guys that they don't care about your feelings anymore. They're just going to go after you. And I'm kind of honestly here for it because it's interesting.
Yeah, I agree. It is really interesting, and it did send me down a loophole. I didn't realize that there was something. I think that his fans refer to themselves as like gripers, I believe is what they're called, and they went basically on a war against Charlie Kirk's kind of TPUSA thing because he was kind of trying to silence them, which is really really interesting. Because from my perspective, I thought he was a big free speech guy, when in reality, post death, I've actually had a more positive opinion on Charlie Kirk than I did when he was alive. But even still, it doesn't seem like he was as pro free speech as he claims he was, which is a lot of people on the right, which is interesting because that's kind of what was big on what Trump ran on.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like 9 months into the Trump presidency, I'm kind of like with his proposing this 50-year mortgage, a lot of some of his other economic policies. I'm like, man, we probably didn't pick the right guy to run because he's a business owner, but there's a certain level of you have to understand that like the 50-year mortgage, you know who that's a gift to? Real estate agents and property developers. That's who it's a gift to, and he gave them that if they get it passed. There's a lot of workaround they have to do, but yeah, that's going to be a gift to them, and that's going to be perpetual renters. You might as well just rent.
What I'm interested to see is how the 2026 midterms go, and if they end up trying to impeach him. I'm interested to see on if the kind of MAGA movement or the JD Vances, Mike Johnsons of the world or even like a Thomas Massey or Rand Paul. I'm interested to see if they go with it and they're like, yeah, impeach him, go, because they're kind of trying to preserve themselves because they think maybe Trump and the MAGA movement is dying, or if they're going to fight it.
I would think honestly, they're probably at the end of the day going to end up fighting because he's like I just think both parties like I gotta be real, I think both parties just need to be completely torn apart and they need to kind of recoalesce because that's just what it is. Like I think there is both parties are gonna have a civil war very, very soon.
So I would agree with that. I don't think it's likely that the parties, completely disappear. I think it maybe be more likely that they would re-image or rebrand. But ideally, at least in my ideal world, they both move closer to the same direction. Not necessarily in a uniparty thing, but kind of in a common sense almost. Like we're trying to represent the same people. We should try to they a lot of people believe the same things. Let's try to represent those. I'm somewhat worried seeing the Nick Fuentes stuff, and then seeing a lot of leftists on the on the Democratic side coming into power. I'm concerned that they might head in opposite directions, far left and far right.
And that is true, that is a possibility, but we have to remember this. In the news cycle, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. The loudest, most bitching and complaining side gets the most airtime. The vast majority of people in the middle, we don't like this shit. We're like, both of you are equally fucked up. Let's be real.
Okay, I mean I agree with that. I just think the issue is then how do we get voices out there? Because I mean I think we can maybe recognize that, but there's probably people out there that think that their common sense just basic thinking ideas that are actually not radical. They may think that they're radical because they're seeing far right and far left voices on TV, because like you said, they're complaining about things all the time, or they're able to grow a movement, which is really interesting. That's about Charlie Kirk, and then Nick Fuentes. It seems like there's a lot more of those voices on the right than there are on the left.
Yeah, because the left, honestly, and the right is starting to fall for this too with like the Marjorie Taylor Greene stuff, is the purity test. The left loves their purity tests. It's actually mind numbing. And the right is starting to do the same thing.
I agree, and I mean, me personally, I think what MTG is doing, a lot from what I'm seeing, her stances are, you know, let's, because she is in a poor district in Georgia. She sees how her constituents will be impacted by the lack of affordable health care, and then on top of that, she seems to be truly America first, which is what Trump sort of ran on. Whereas he's giving out. I understand why he gave that money to Argentina, but then we have given tons of money to Ukraine, tons of money to Israel, and he ran on an
Hmm.
anti-war America first one, and I don't understand how you can be giving so much money to Israel when the majority of people in this country at this point are against what they're doing over there. And then on top of that, we see APAC having their influence on so many of our politicians. MTG standing against that along with Massey, tells me that they're on the right side, because I don't think APAC should be allowed to be having these influence on our politicians when they're not even registered as a foreign lobby.
I agree with that. And I also think we should get rid of the dual citizenship. I agree. I think if you run for public office, you cannot have dual citizenship. You have to have loyalty to this country. If you want to have dual citizenship, don't run for public office. But like you were talking about healthcare, which is really interesting because I'm seeing a lot more concierge medicine coming out. And this doctor on TikTok actually explained that for her, you pay $100 a month, you get tests, and the tests out of pocket are only like 95 or $100. To whereas you have to go through insurance, you have to hit a deductible limit before you can start using insurance. And it's like, let's look at stuff like that. Let's look at because I wish more doctors would come along that route and go, yeah, $100 a month, and you get like 4 or 5 hours a month with me. We can do tests and MRI. It doesn't cost a couple thousand. It costs $200. But I think that's a way to actually fix healthcare in this country and make it more profitable without more taxpayer expense. Because when you look at it, people spend what, $50 to $100 a month on streaming services, probably. Why not take that money and go, okay, let me go and put it towards health, and I don't have to pay large premiums and pay large out of pocket so that I can hit the deductible limit and insurance starts paying.
See, what I find interesting is we knew that these ACA premiums were going to double at the end of this year, and Kamala Harris and her whole campaign knew that. Yet they were running on essentially an opposition party campaign, opposing Trump. Trump's bad. He's going to do bad things. When I think it would have been more effective if they were just, putting out information like, hey, he's going to try to, make your monthly premiums double. We're going to try to keep them where they are. I think if they ran on, something like that, just common sense, or we're trying to help you, I think it would have been more effective. And I don't understand why they did that. Or you see her turn down a Joe Rogan podcast, and it's like, why would you turn that down? It almost, leads me to ask, is that party, are they, is it just that they're incompetent, or were they trying to lose? Because I don't understand either of those two things.
Honestly, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. Both parties, like, this is like lawyers in court. You have the prosecutor and the defense attorney. They're adversarial when they're in court, but they go out and get drinks after the case is over. That's what both parties are. At the end of the day, that's what they are. They're the prosecutor and the defense attorneys, and I don't care which side you say is the prosecutor or the defense attorney. But when they're done, they go out and drink together and have dinner.
I understand that. I think that was probably, even more true pre-Trump. This past election, and then I guess the past three, it did seem like, I remember watching Romney and Obama, or like McCain and Obama. It seemed like there was some, they were cordial, or they had some, respectful understanding of each other. It did seem like this one, they were just attacked. It seemed like they were both prosecuting each other, and neither of them were even defending.
No, what I mean by that is I mean, like, they put on a dog and pony show for us, but then they sit down and go, okay, what do we really need to do to get accomplished? And how do we keep it looking like we don't like each other? And I
Okay.
think that's why people don't like Massey, Paul, and Marjorie Taylor Greene anymore, because they're not willing to play this game.
I mean, I understand if, why they wouldn't like them. As a citizen, as a non-politician, I really, really I have a ton of respect for them. And I think another name I'm going to throw out there, I don't know if you heard of him, his name is James Tallarico out of Texas.
No, I haven't
He
heard of it.
he is just a state representative right now. He's studying to be a minister as well, but he used to be a middle school English teacher. He
Hmm.
he's running for Senate right now. He's aiming to be the first Democratic senator in Texas in 30 years. He has put forward some bipartisan bills that have actually passed in Texas, which is, unheard of. So I agree with you that, if someone's trying to do the right thing, the political machine or whatever it is, they don't like you.
And honestly, I don't know if we can uncage. I don't know if we can cage the political machine, because I'm just naturally a very kind of cynical, skeptical person of people in power. And I wonder, is this just controlled opposition? That's what I have to wonder.
That's a great question, and that's what, as I was looking into Nick Fuentes, and then as I was looking into uh, there's another guy. His name's Alex Jones. I think he's definitely in controlled opposition. Nick Fuentes, I'm feeling the same thing, because it's almost like, how are these people allowed to ask these questions, and nothing's happening. We saw what happened to Charlie Kirk. We saw what happened to other people that ask questions. Maybe they don't get killed, but they get silenced, they get deplatformed. It is interesting to see how certain people seep through the cracks and they're able to appear as what could be controlled opposition.
And we have to ask them the question is, do we see them as controlled opposition because we've been so conditioned and are so jaded by the process in this country?
Sadly, I think it. How would you tell between the two? It could be a combination of both, realistically, right?
Yeah, it really could be a combination of both. Like, you remember that movie? There's a very famous line from it. I came here to kick ass and chew bubblegum, and I'm all out of gum. That is the movie that I think we actually are living in. There are certain people that can see the people behind the human. Have you ever seen that movie?
No, I haven't seen that movie, but I've seen that quotation on images before.
Yeah, that it's in the movie. And I think it's like they are amongst us, and it's like basically like certain people in positions of power are actually aliens, and only when he puts on the sunglasses does he see them. Otherwise, they look like regular people.
Hmm.
It's really kind of neat when you think about it. That like, and this is the philosophical side of me going, what if all this is just a giant game that we're a part of?
I could see that. I think I touched on it last time. I brought up Sisyphus, and I brought up,
Yes, you did.
how he's watching that. Well, he's watching that rock roll down the hill, and he's thinking, "Oh, how absurd is the world? How absurd is my life that I push a rock up a hill just to watch it roll back down, and then I got to push it up again." And it comes back to the point where we can say, "Oh, that's ridiculous, that's absurd," and we can let that get to us, and we can let that hold us back, or we can try to live in defiance and say, "You know what? So what? The world's absurd. So what? It's pointless. I'm gonna live regardless." And I think that's what we need to do.
And that's honestly a very true point. And we do need to live our lives, and we honestly need to take more risks with our lives. Like for me, like I got little backstory about me. I haven't really worked a normal job since 2015 when I left the freight docks, and I am much happier doing what I do now, which is my podcast, Uber, and I started a micro e-learning tech company a month ago, and I'm building that out right now.
Well, Jeff, I mean, is there any other topics you want to touch on? I know we touched on the mortgages, we touched on the pornography. I know we tried to shoot for 30 minutes, so I don't want to try to keep
Yeah,
you too
I
long.
mean, we like if you good, but it's getting dark out. If we can wrap this up, and then you just want to come back on before Christmas.
Yeah, we did it. I think we did one 3 weeks ago. So we could just do one 3 weeks from now.
All right, let me look and see what day that is. But okay, we'll talk. We'll talk after we get done with this show. So,
Sounds good.
all right. So I'm gonna put a bow on this show for us today. I want to thank Max for being on here again. You are like you are a wealth of information, and you're a really fun person to talk to. We always keep it respectful here. So I'm gonna let him shout it out, and then I'm gonna close this out. Max, shout out your socials.
Thanks again for having me on. You can find me on X, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, and also TikTok at Masked Truther. And you can also find Jeff's channel on there as well.
Thank you, Matt. Now, the thing is I'm gonna probably not put any shorts out this week for everyone. I'm just gonna do have this long form video. But I just want to thank everyone who is going to watch this. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share. Follow Mass Truther on all his socials. Follow me on mine. And just let's spread this message out there because we can all come together and realize we have more in common than we have that separates us. So until next Monday, as always, stay free, stay informed, stay accountable, and have a great week.